Wait a minute. Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus.
And I'm Phyllis Zimbler Miller.
The victims who survived the atrocities of October 7, the hostages that returned, and their families. How are they doing mentally several months after the hell they were in? We are discussing this with a mental health expert who lives and works in Israel and Los Angeles, and who recently was in Israel. Dr. Orly Petter is a clinical and neuropsychologist with almost 30 years of experience as a practitioner, researcher, and educator. She has conducted psychological research at the University of California at Berkeley, UCLA, and the Rand Corporation. She has helped restabilize survivors and witnesses of 9/11, Iranian refugees, families who fled war torn countries, and Israeli victims of terrorist attacks. Orly, welcome back to our show. We had you a few years ago at the beginning of our show, also as a guest. Welcome back, and
Yes.
thank you for coming on.
Thank you. I want to also add that I've also worked with Palestinians as well, treating trauma.
Okay. All right. So you just returned from Israel. How long were you there, and why did you decide to go?
Yes, I just returned and I'm still a little bit jet lagged, but I so much wanted to be on the podcast with the two of you who are doing such admirable work. Um, and we were there for 6 weeks. And I had to go. I didn't feel like I had a choice to not go. The country is just in tremendous need after the shocking October 7th invasion and atrocities. Um, and I have expertise that I could use to help the country. Probably I was also driven by the fact that my father is a Holocaust survivor, and I not only understand trauma psychologically, neurologically, but also personally.
Yeah.
What kind of work as a psychologist have you done in Israel? In other words, tell us the start. Take us through what happens when you meet with someone for the first time, and where were you? Were you in a hospital setting, a private setting? Take us through it.
So actually, we started our work with the October 7th survivors, particularly the survivors of the Nova Music Festival, who are young people, mostly between like 18 and 22, 23, 24 years old. And many of them were shipped here to Los Angeles by many by the Iranian community. And so
Let me just clarify something. Shipped here sounds like they were set in containers. So they were invited here for rest and recuperation. Explain it. And also, I want to notice that you say we. So, are you part of a team?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for keeping me on track. So after October 7th, I started a nonprofit called Israel Healing Initiative. And we are a group there's about 14 or 15 of us, it keeps growing, of neurologists, neuropsychologists, psychologists, forensic psychiatrists, researchers, some of whom are, have worked with US Army research. And we've all come together because we are on what we feel is the cutting edge of trauma treatment. We came together to try to help the October 7th survivors, and now what has spread to just victims of terror and or war. So that's who we are. And no, I didn't mean they were shipped in that way, but there's a great Jewish community here in Los Angeles. They're very cohesive and they can operate quickly. And after October 7th, there's an organization called Maman and other organizations that got together to bring out many Nova survivors to not only give them rest and recuperation, but also to help with treatment. And so I was, one of the psychologists who began treating those survivors fresh after October 8th. And what I did, and what my team is doing, is the first thing we did is some very simple neural imaging, which is called a QEEG. And it's a type of neural imaging that looks at how the brain is functioning. Many people don't know that when someone has been when someone has had to endure a severe trauma, they may have their brain functioning impaired in ways that we call PTSD. Not everybody who has, been witness or endured a trauma gets PTSD. But those that do, we can look at how the brain is functioning and see how it is dysfunctioning in predictable ways. And that helps expedite our treatment because, PTSD is a conglomeration of symptoms, and not everybody has all of those symptoms. But when we look at how the brain is functioning in these predictable ways, we can see exactly the root of what may be causing some of the symptoms that people are having, and then we can target it directly. So that's the first thing that we did in Los Angeles, and that we did for many of the people in Israel. Then after that, what we can do once we see how the brain is not functioning properly, we can add certain types of energies. They're electrical patterns of energies to help it function better, to help it function probably how it used to function before they were involved in the trauma. For some of these people, we have pre and post neural imaging, so we can actually see the difference. And for others, all that we can do is compare them to a regular, uh, brain functioning that we have of people their age and of their sex. And once we add those types of electrical patterns to get their brain functioning properly, we can also simultaneously do certain types of trauma treatments. And that's what we do.
And so, if I understand you correctly, Orly, you image the brain functioning of the people who had endured the trauma, and that makes you able to locate. In that way, you can see what may be the exact character of the trauma, and then you can target more precisely with the treatment that specific person's traumatic symptoms. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, for example, one thing that almost everybody has who's traumatized is, obviously their nervous system is in hyperarousal. And you can see this on YouTube even. So when somebody's nervous system is in hyperarousal, it's a neurological event. It's no longer just a psychological event. So they can talk and have, talk-based treatment for a long time, and it's not going to be as efficient or effective because it's not getting to the root of the problem. So one of the things that we do for almost everybody, because this is going to be true of almost everybody who's had trauma, is the first thing is we try to hack the nervous system and try to calm it down so that they're able to take in the trauma treatment, whatever kind of trauma treatment that they're having. In fact, right now, as we're speaking, I have one of the little home devices that we gave to the survivors for them to take home and use every day. And I'll show it to you. It's on my left ear, on the tragus portion of my ear.
Mhm.
And that's because there's a nerve that YouTube has made very famous, called the vagus nerve, and it's the 10th cranial nerve in the brain, and it goes in to the heart and to the major organs. And when it's activated, it actually calms us down.
Okay, so the treatment was that your team gave was not so much talking, but it was energetic pulses or something like that that calms down the nervous system. Is that correct?
Well, we also did talking to. That's one of the beauty of using neurostimulation, is we can talk just like I'm talking to you right now while I'm having just a very simple home device on me, to help, regulate the nervous system. So keep in mind that the brain, the cells in our brain communicate. The language it speaks is electrical patterns. That's
Okay.
how it communicates. So we're kind of going in there and, hacking it and giving it the pattern that it should be having if it's now reconnected to the current external world and not trapped in the trauma.
Okay. So, uh, what kind of mental health problems did you come across during your recent work in Israel? Um, Problems that were caused by October 7th or triggered?
So we came across nearly everything that you can imagine because the trauma was so severe. Um, It was the most severe. I've been in the field actually for over 30 years, and it was the most severe of any trauma that I've worked with, probably because it was multi-layered. It was not only, like, let's say if we treat people here in the US of a mass trauma or a mass shooting, it's a horrific kind of event to have to endure, to duck bullets and watch your friends be murdered. But many of the October 7th victims, they not only had that, they were ducking bullets, first of all, for many hours, for up to 5 hours or more, and watching, massacre happen in front of them. But they also may have also witnessed torture, dismemberment of people they knew, um, brutal rape. They may also have a family member or a friend that they witnessed being kidnapped and is now in the tunnels. So it's layer of trauma on top of each other, and the kind of trauma that we saw was the most severe. Um, so you can imagine that as a result of that, the normal day-to-day functioning was impaired. So if somebody is usually, let's say, you might be nervous or stressed, you can take that exponentially and multiply that by 10. If somebody walks into a room and they're maybe normally a little vigilant to kind of see who's in the room, you can multiply that by 10. They may be looking, where's the door in case I have to escape? What's in someone's pockets? How does everyone look? Are these people I know can't, this kind of thing. It's walking into a room knowing that death may be at the corner. Um, if they're driving, and I'm relaying to you uh, actual stories
Yeah.
that we heard and had to help treat. Driving in a car and getting stuck in traffic, a normal thing that's going to stress anybody. But now it's like, oh my God, what happens
Correct.
if somebody shoots, and I'm stuck? How can I get out? So these kinds of things are exacerbated to a level of extreme that we don't normally see. Sleep problems, instead of sleep problems that we would see with somebody who's stressed here, that maybe 4 or 5 hours a night, sleep problems of an hour a night.
Let
Um,
me clarify. You mean being able to sleep for an hour a night?
yes,
Yes,
yeah,
because of
exactly.
being so hypervigilant that they can't sleep.
Because their nervous system is so on fire, it's so hyper aroused that it's constantly kicking in.
Yeah.
Um, in
Do they?
addition
Yeah.
to the
Go ahead.
interference in the normal day-to-day living, there's also, in quiet times and quiet moments in between these kinds of panic and terror, is existential questions, questioning, um, the model that they had of the world. It's more evil and capable of more atrocities than they ever could imagine. And what does that mean for how they should behave in the world right now? Questioning themselves within the world. Like, did I respond? Am I as strong as I thought? Did I respond in the best way that I could? Every single Nova survivor that we saw had survivor guilt. How could I have not saved my friend? Even though when they tell us the stories, they did things that were so heroic to any one of us who would hear the story, they did not perceive themselves that way. They could only focus on the pain that they couldn't save their friend or their sister or their cousin. So
Can
those
I
are the
ask for
kinds of things.
a clarification? I noticed you didn't mention medication. And I do know that here in the United States, medication is sometimes given, don't want to say willy-nilly, I'm not a psychologist, but I've done a lot of volunteer work on PTSD, which we should say stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I know that sometimes medication is given rather than actual treatment. So do you give any medication? I noticed that you didn't mention it.
Medication is given here in the US, and it is considered a form of treatment. It's not very, let me put it this way, more than medication is needed, and there's questions about its efficacy, about how effective it is. One of the things about medication, even if it can be, even with the effect that it can have, it's something systemic. You take it, it goes through your bloodstream, it affects everything in your body. So there's going to be side effects, and sometimes those side effects are minimal, sometimes they're not. Um, we prefer the stimulation because it's very precise. It's not systemic.
Electrical stimulation.
Yeah, electrical stimulation or
Because
electromagnetic stimulation. Yes. Yes. We're not talking about other types of stimulation.
So back to the mental health problems. You were talking about guilt feelings. That was when we interrupted you. And any other severe symptoms that you came across a lot with the people who survived? In this case, the dance party
Well,
atrocities.
what's common is an interference in connecting to the outside world. And that can manifest with severe attention problems. You're supposed to be attending to whatever task you're doing, but images, it could be direct images of what happened in the past can interfere. It could be a
Flashbacks.
re-experiencing
Flash.
flashbacks. It could be
Yeah.
a re-experiencing of something in the trauma that happened that's interfering in the moment to moment of the external world. It may just be a complete, disengagement, a complete dissociation, a numbness that can occur that can interfere with what you're doing in the external world. It is going to impact relationships and your ability to stay close with someone because of the utter fear that's inside your body. it's, you know, as I said before, it impacts sleep, but it impacts what we call labile emotions, which means emotions that are not stable. They can fluctuate from one extreme to the other. So it really, the more severe the trauma, the more severe the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, the more this is going to impact and interfere in every single sphere of day-to-day living.
People have said that in Israel, everyone has PTSD. I'm exaggerating, obviously, because of the sirens and the overall stress of survival. But could you define for us, mental illness, and what percentage of the population has what you would say needs to be treated and what doesn't need to be treated?
Since October
Sure.
7. Since October 7.
Well, also before.
Yeah.
So, depending on where people live in Israel before October 7th, there was very high rates of PTSD already. So, for instance, the people that lived by the Gaza border, people in the cities of Sderot or other adjacent cities, had a very high PTSD rate. And it varied. I mean, the research varied as to what it was, but anywhere from a third of the people with full-blown PTSD to something much higher. I don't want to say how high because it's under dispute, but much, much higher. And especially during the war when there were frequent rockets coming from Gaza into the neighboring cities. The PTSD rate was measured as high as 80 to high 80s percent. And even not during the war, by the way, because there wasn't always a war when Hamas was sending in rockets. And I had visited those communities before October 7th, and it was really tragic to see how the children were having to be raised with the sirens going off, and they would have 20 seconds or less to run to a bomb shelter. So it varied. People that lived in Tel Aviv, for instance, pre-October 7th, had a much lower PTSD rate. Right now, since October 7th, I don't know any studies that have looked at the whole country or random amount, enough people in the whole country to come up with a mass measure. But I can tell you that I don't believe I met anyone the whole 6 to 7 weeks that we were there, and we traveled the country. We were in the north, we were in the center, and we were in the south, who didn't have something that would be a major stress disorder, if not full-blown PTSD.
Yeah. Everybody had.
Everybody is in need of some sort of mental health treatment.
It one of the things
And
I
by the way, that includes, we visited Rahat, which is a city that is a Bedouin city, a major Bedouin city in the south. And we met with one of the leaders there and met with some of the people who are already undergoing treatment there. And they were pleading with us for more help. So it is not just the people that may be reported on, in the media here. It's people that is the full spectrum of the multicultural landscape in Israel. It is Bedouins, it is Druze that live in the north. In fact, the whole north is virtually dysfunctional right now because tens of thousands of people, anywhere from 60 to 100,000 people, depending
Right.
how you measure it, have been evacuated from their homes till now, even,
Yes.
and are living in hotels. And even though some of them may or may not have full-blown PTSD, you can imagine the stress of families that are living in one-room places and are unable to go, to their home, live in their home, or be in their school, the kids to be in their school. So this is constant low grade stress. And then they're still close enough because we visited them, where they're even where they're seeking refuge, the building is still shaking every time a missile from Hezbollah hits close.
Yeah. It's a war zone in a way. So, um, yeah, also, I would like to ask your thoughts about that. One of the aspects of a trauma is also that a person's illusion of invulnerability is shocked or shattered. Um, is that something you think that is now in Israelis' minds in general, that for the first time in their history, um, all these terrorists could come into their country and slaughter people? Um, that hasn't happened before. Is that something you think that also plays a role in some way of stress, in their stress disorders?
Completely. In fact, in a basic way in terms of recovery, because another thing that's different from what we've seen, um, when we've worked with the 9/11 survivors, or even many of the Iraqi vets, is that the trauma had a beginning and an end, especially with 9/11. And by the time we see the Iraqi vets, that's true. Whereas in Israel right now, for 7 months, is continuous. There is no rest. There's no way for the brain to recover on its own in a safe way. And the fact that, well, let me put it this way. One of the crucial things to begin treatment with PTSD is there has to be a post. PTSD is post trauma. There has to be a post to the trauma. There's not a post to the trauma yet. It's
Yeah,
still a continuous trauma.
yeah,
And when that happens, when there's no post, that means that how does the nervous system find safety? So at least it can have, moments of safety, and it can start repairing what's going on inside the body.
yeah,
If there's a sense, as you're pointing out, Evelyn, where the there's still vulnerability, that rockets are still flying. And I want to add another piece of this. The survivors do not feel there's safety in the outside world. So it's not, this is a secondary form of trauma, that if you've been traumatized, but you can go home, let's say in a sexual abuse case, but you can go home to a good family who is embracing you, or a good community, or a good school where they understand what has happened, and they are surrounding you in an emotional safety. That helps the treatment of trauma. It helps the recovery of trauma. But right now in Israel, what we have is, not only was there an unspeakable trauma that pierced through all of the defenses that they thought that the government had provided for them, in terms, of the fences that was around Gaza that Hamas was able to pierce through in terms of the government being able to come to their rescue sooner than they were able to do. In terms of the bombardment, I was there during the Iranian missile bombardment, and seeing that there's ways to overwhelm the defense system in Israel, and that, you know, if Iran via Hezbollah and Hamas and the surrounding countries decide to overwhelm the defense system, that they're sitting ducks, basically. This does not bode well for the recovery of trauma. And add to that the fact that much of the protests that when I was in Israel, we were seeing every day on the news, the campus protests that are seen as being in support of Hamas, who just committed these atrocities. That does not help the recovery of trauma.
To clarify, you mean the campus protests in the United States?
Yes. The campus protests in the United States and Europe.
Okay, but also depending on which side you are, we're not talking politics, the protests that go on in Israel must also be upsetting, depending on which side
That's not what she said. No.
No, but here she's talking, here we're talking about
campus. What? We didn't see that. What we saw, people were just distraught over what the campus protests that are going on in the United States, that are being viewed as being in support of the people that just committed the atrocities against them.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. So, I don't know if you spoke with any hostages that had returned, but
we did not.
You did not. Do you think that hostages that come back can ever recover from mentally from that experience?
Well, it depends what you mean by recover. By the way, I would define recover, I would say yes. And the reason why I qualify it is because getting PTSD has a effect on the person that will make them either worse than they were before the trauma or better. They won't come out the same. And in the old days, when we first studied how to help PTSD, the goal was what was called to bring them back to their pre-morbid state, meaning how they functioned before. That's no longer our goal. Our goal is to make them better than what they were before. Now that they have experienced this, we try to not only repair their nervous system so that they can be functioning in the world, but also in the long term help with the existential crisis that this has caused, and make them more robust, which we've seen in a subsection of Holocaust survivors, that they can be more optimistic in the face of crisis. For instance, let me just give you a little anecdote of my father, who is a Holocaust survivor. He's still alive. During 9/11, here in Los Angeles, thousands of miles, more than 2,000 miles away from the World Trade Towers, people here, my friends, were panicked about what could happen. And at the very beginning, people were asking for gas masks, which was very hard to get here. Everything was sold out. Any kind of survival stuff was sold out. So they asked me to ask my father, who was living in Israel, if he could get us some gas masks. which were being provided there for the citizens in Israel. And I asked my father, can you get us some gas masks? And his response, instead of the panic that was all around us, was, okay, sure, Orly. If you want some gas masks, I'll get you some gas masks. And it was just kind of, you could just feel from his response that he was not exactly humoring us, but it was kind of cute that we were worried. And here he was, after what he'd been through, you would think that he would be even more panicked because attacks were happening in Israel at the same time, or around the same time. But he wasn't. He was robust and strong, and he could see the bigger picture. And if it made his daughter and her friends feel better to have gas masks, he'll get us gas masks. So that's the kind of robustness that we're looking for, that we're trying to help promote, first by having the nervous system function better and be more responsive to what's happening in the external world and not being intruded upon so much by the trauma, and then dealing with a revision of the model that they had of the external world and of who they are internally in the face of a threat this big, to help make them more optimistic and more robust and more courageous, by the way.
And that is done through talk therapy.
First, yes, it's done through a combination, because talk therapy on its own is not the best at being able to reduce nervous system activation.
I get it. Is there something we can do as listeners to this podcast? Something we can do to support victims that survived the Hamas atrocities in Israel?
Yeah, I would say two things.
Okay.
One, the secondary trauma of the survivors not feeling supported. There's a lot that people can do, whether it's on social media or directly to the survivors, to let them know that they are supported, that they are seen, that their suffering and fear and distraughtness is understood, and that they're emotionally supported. And then the second thing, anything directly that you can do to help people like my organization or other organizations that are skilled at going to help the survivors would be greatly appreciated. In terms of my organization, Israel Healing Initiative, we are sending out these experts not only to help the survivors directly, but we're also working with medical clinics and hospitals to help train the psychological staff there and the medical staff there in how to deal with trauma, to help expedite the treatment and help scale it, because the whole country is in need. So if you can help us help them, we would appreciate it.
I take it you have a URL that we will share in the description when we upload this interview.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so we'll share that with our listeners so they can know directly how to help Orly's organization. And as we come to the end of this interview, is there something that we missed that's so important you'd love to share with us?
I think you hit it all. I mean, I think that this is a turning point in the world right now. We're only beginning to see the repercussions. So everybody who can help, please help.
Yes. Yes, please listen to what Orly, I mean, amazing work that you've been doing, your response, and also for someone who's done volunteer information in PTSD for many years, I just want to say PTSD also doesn't just come from war. And there are many cases domestically that I'm thinking of one case that I was able to say to a friend, I realized she was having PTSD and something that, I'm not going to say it here, but needed help. And sometimes it doesn't manifest itself right away. So all of us should, and I'm talking as the non-professional, both of you are professionals, but all of you, all of us should be aware of possible symptoms and realizing and recognizing when people need help and then helping them to get help.
And Phyllis, that's a great point that you brought up. And let me just piggyback on that too. What we see is that anybody who has had prior early childhood trauma or some other type of trauma, they're actually more at risk of getting PTSD and a more severe form of it. That's what we're seeing in Israel, and that is actually common. So yes, you're absolutely right. And it piggybacks off each other if it's not treated.
Yes, I used to say this earlier, and remember, non-professional, but in the studies that earlier it's treated, the better. And also, I think we need to realize, I have a young relative, he's 30, and he said after October 7th, he had no idea how many people hate Jews. And I really think that while he doesn't have PTSD, it's his world view has also shifted. And I really do think that he's suffering, whatever the word suffering means there. And that we need, so I gave him a chance to talk one day when I realized he needed to just talk about that. So we should all be open to these conversations, I believe you're saying. Is that correct?
Yeah, we should be open to it. You know, there's an incitement going on. People that may not have previously hated Jews are being incited to hate right now. And there's things that all of us can do to band together against that. That's the second, you know, what I call like a secondary type of trauma that's going on, a repercussion.
Right. And I just think we all need to be sensitive, even within our own families. I can think of another case in my family that their young people's depression level is really affected by what's here in the United States, by what's going on around them and how their world has shifted. So Orly's work is even more important for all of us. And I thank you so much for coming on the show. I thank our listeners for listening. For those of you who want to know more about Evelyn and myself and our work, you can go to Never Again Is Now podcast, either on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.